So, hi, folks. We're here for a session about how we treat our customers. So, we've got four fantastic panelists Varun, Matthew, Jahred, and Anton. Perhaps the best thing actually is if we all do a really quick introduction. Might be a good way to start for the backgrounds we're coming from. So, my name's Rob. I'm a sort of a recovering internet plumbing and web guy who's been doing Asterisk for gosh, about 14 years, mostly from a technical background, but I've founded, run, and sold VoIP companies. So that's my background. Maybe go along the panel. Quick intro.
Hi, I'm Varun Singh. I'm the CEO of CallStats.io. Before I started CallStats, I was a PhD student at doing congestion control and improving video quality. And before that, I used to work for Nokia and Ericsson and so on and so forth. So that's my 30 seconds.
And I'm Matthew Hodgson. I'm the technical co-founder of Matrix.org. I think I'm here wearing my Matrix Foundation badge. I'm also the CEO and CTO of New Vector, which is a startup that builds solutions on top of Matrix. Matrix itself is a decentralized communications protocol, and in a past life, we did SIP. We built SIP stacks, we did RTP, we did WebRTC, and Matrix is in some ways a reaction against 8 years of building SIP and IMS and RCS infrastructure, and wondering how the world might be if you built on HTTP rather than SIP.
Hi, my name is Jahred Love. I am CTO of Xerxes. We provide WebRTC infrastructure. So I kind of have a hand in a lot of the technical support, tickets, and sales, and I kind of do a little bit of everything, and I've always been a bit of a jack of all trades. So, yeah, it's me.
Hi, my name is Anton. I am the CTO and co-founder of Frozen Mountain Software. We provide WebRTC client SDKs and WebRTC server solutions, and we built a WebRTC stack from the ground up in parallel with the efforts in the web browsers, and spend a lot of time supporting interoperability and scalability.
Brilliant, thank you. So, talking about user experience, I saw one of those apocryphal tweets a little while ago, which said something to the effect of, if you want to deliver truly excellent solutions, all you really have to do is have your developers talk to users regularly. For $1,500 a day, I can send a consultant in to tell you that the long way. Anyone have any impressions on that? Is it really as simple as that? Who wants to take that?
I'm not really sure. Most developers are always happy with talking to any client of any kind. I think that's the nature of many developers. But I do think that there is often a detachment between developers and users, which if that gap was bridged, then I think it would reduce a lot of work from both parties. And I think that has been proven in my career several times when it's been possible.
I think I can jump in. I think it's really important to dog food your own software, so make your developers your users. It's one thing to build out a tool or infrastructure or an SDK, API, something that someone can use. It's another thing to actually use it and see what it's like to use it. You can, if you force your team to take the user's view, you'll find that things often change.
I guess on our side, we're in quite a strange situation, being a protocol in its own right, that our users are across the entire spectrum. It's not like a well-defined customer segment that you're selling to. Instead, you're deliberately trying to build something very generic. And we just set up the Matrix.org Foundation as a non-profit to try to have the governance process in place to support our users, and that meant defining who the users were. And literally ended up writing a bullet point, and it's like, end users on Matrix clients is like one of about 20 different stakeholders in the ecosystem, because you also have the client developers, the spec developers, the server admins, the packagers and maintainers, companies building on top of Matrix, bridge, bot, widget, server developers, moderators, end users who aren't using Matrix directly, but come in via a bridge, but it's still kind of a user indirectly. External systems which are bridged in, like, I know, Slack discovers they're part of Matrix, whether they want to be or not, but somebody's gone and bridged them in. And trying to manage the completely different requirements of the different stakeholders is a particular type of hell, honestly. And I think it's made it even worse by the nature of a communication platform being that people dog food it the other way around. That it's the users who jump on Matrix to say, I think you're going to hell because you don't have end-to-end encryption turned on by default. And then you've got a whole bunch of other people saying how without lawful intercept requirement, we can't possibly roll this out in my country. And trying to work out how to rationalize totally different stakeholders when you're running a non-profit foundation is challenging.
Right, so for us, from the beginning, we've, since we're an analytics company, we've always had the user at the core of the company, right? Because we help our customers understand how to produce, how their users experience the quality of experience of video and audio. So actually, customer focus is one of the core tenets of CallStats. When you join CallStats, you go through a process where you're taught the values of the company, and one of the 5 values, amongst others, is customer focus. So it's something that's drilled in from day one. It's part of our hiring process as well. So when we talk to developers, and I would ask like, I'm the last interview, so I would be like, hey, so you build all this cool stuff. How did you build it? Why did you build it? How did you pick the things that you needed to build at your previous job? So as that whole process of asking these questions is to ascertain, did they have the user in their mind when they built it? Or was it something like someone gave them a spec and they just built it because someone told them to build it? And that's totally different from, like, even if that was the case, you should be, at that interview, be able to say, like, although I was given a spec and I followed the spec, but I think the spec was written with these people in mind. Makes it easier when you come onto CallStats because, like, core of the product, like every algorithm we build is not for the customer, it's for the end user, because we're measuring the end user's quality of experience. How we display it or how the customer uses it is a secondary problem, but we have to first understand what annoys users, like what are the things that they deeply care about, because when they complain to the customer who then uses CallStats, we should have had that person in their mind, because if someone suddenly shows up and says, like, someone's complaining about quality issues, you can't start diagnosing at that point. You have to already have an answer, especially since the product's been out in the wild for 5 years. Like, if I was starting the company today, I would definitely run it by, like, what are the problems that your customers are facing, then I'll build it in. But 5 years hence, it's like we have to keep the user core to our thought process.
That's really interesting, actually, and it was a really interesting cross spectrum coming down the way of a very clearly very customer-focused organization that in its vision and its hiring practice and every part of it can effectively say, we're going to put our customer dead center. And then listening to Matthew's answer of, how do we apply that? How does that work in open source projects? Because, you've got people that are not paid contributors that are just contributing for the love of it. You've got people that have come into the project for the love of it and are now paid contribute. How do you sort of enforce that user-centered vision? Because after all, open source projects do what the developers love, right? So what if what the developer loves isn't what the user wants to buy?
I'd say that it's in some ways it's even worse than that. It's not just the developers building whatever they want, because in an open source project you have some governance and some goals which you as the project are trying to build. But you really have a problem that the people who yell the loudest are often not the most representative of your normal users. And I went and took all of the bugs we have open for Riot, which is the flagship Matrix client, last night. And we've got 3,500 bugs open and about 8,000 closed, so it's not that bad. And we ordered them by upvotes to see what are the users saying, what do the users want? And the first 4 ones were relatively sane. It was like 200 upvotes for multiple account support in the client, so you can log into multiple servers at the same time. Sounds sensible. Then you had ability to export logs as plain text. Kind of embarrassing, we don't have that yet. And then I think it was the 3rd or 4th one was 90 people who had upvoted MathJax support. People wanting to put LaTeX into their group chats. This is like across 3,500 bugs, apparently the single most important thing for so many people. Really? Really, do we really believe that that is actually going to change the history of Matrix? Or is it that there is a small minority of very loud people who consider a weird, very specific thing critical to them? And I find that is really hard. It's like a fundamental existential risk to the project. If you're a product manager and you're sitting there trying to work out what people should work on, and you listen unfilteredly to what the users are saying, you're just going to end up chasing some really obscure fringe things which people care an awful lot about at the expense of the long tail of 98% of people who gave up after 5 minutes because the onboarding sucked. And they're the people you never hear from, and they're the people who make the difference between whether the product works. And if anybody knows how to solve that one, I think, well, please tell me.
Yeah. Collect more data.
I think there's sat here thinking about it, and I was clearly thinking about it before, but now it's just occurred to me that there are varying levels or layers of irony, because when you run a business, when you're creating a product for other people, communication it's about a relationship. You talk to your wife, you wouldn't marry her and never talk to her. So you have a relationship there. You have a relationship with your customers. You have a relationship with your bank manager. Everything's a relationship, and everyone here at this conference right now are experts in some form of in communication, and still, there's no one really has a golden rule as to how to make that those relationships, the communication between relationships, work perfectly in every scenario. And so we're debating now. What is that communication? How should that communication flow? And it's a problem for every single person on the planet, because no matter what business you're creating or what relationship you're creating, if you don't communicate successfully, then your initial idea or whatever it is you want to achieve will flop. So you have to get that right. But you also have to work out who it is you're speaking to. Are you speaking to the end user, or is there someone else you should be speaking to? If you're in a relationship with someone, maybe you should be speaking to a marriage counselor rather than your partner. So there's always it's a moving landscape all the time, and you're constantly having to think about it, even when communication is at the center point of that particular relationship. It's still changing. It's still not a fixed thing.
Brilliant set of analogies there. Love that. Yeah, incredibly true. Okay, I'm going to take this in a different direction now, I think, unless anyone's got anything else to say on that. So the interactional web, you can kind of chart progress of user experience design from about 1995, where we were just about throwing together unstyled HTML pages with a CGI bin contact form, through to 2019, where certain e-commerce outfits can tail you to the nearest number of 10 cents, how moving a button 3 pixels to the left will affect user experience and user behavior. Where do you think the real-time conversational web is on that 1995 to 2019 progression of maturity of user experience? Anyone want to talk to that?
So I think a lot of the things that we used to deal with are still relevant today. For instance, in this country, there are laws that state that if you're building a web application, there are certain accessibility criteria that you need to cater for. And I still believe that a lot of people who have applications on the internet are still not meeting those basic rules, including a lot of the organizations that are actually there to support people with accessibility problems. They often, if you go on a government website, that's incredibly inaccessible for a lot of people. So there are old rules which people still aren't necessarily meeting, and there are new factors coming in all the time that people are also having to jump, hurdles that they're having to deal with. So it's sort of old and new, just progressing forward. That you don't really ever get rid of anything. You can improve it, but it's still always there.
I can add to that. I think too that we're always building on what was done before. So the state of web applications in 2019 is based on the state of web applications in 2018, and we're kind of advancing and kind of changing the baseline, and things that you had to do building applications 10 years ago is just kind of done for you, part of the framework built out. And I don't think real-time communications are quite there yet. I think there's still a big learning curve. There's still a lot of time and effort that people have to put into delivering a really great video experience, a really great audio experience. We would like to see it get to the point where it's just kind of a given. Like you can just drop a few lines of code, drop it in, it's just boilerplate, and we move on. but I don't think we're there yet.
I guess from the matrix side, we have going back to the question specifically of how much instrumentation we have, I guess on the core stat side, we've got excellent VoIP and WebRTC analytics. And thank you, by the way, for core stats supporting matrix and letting us instrument how people are using the WebRTC bits. But on the instant messaging and the group conversation side of things, I think honestly there is a long, long way to go. And it's something that we are looking at a lot, particularly on the foundation side. In fact, trying to hit up kind of foundations for philanthropic funding at the moment to look at this, not from a customer research or a kind of marketing perspective, but more an abuse management. Now, Matrix has got 10 million users on it now, and that is a massive spectrum of society, and you've got a lot of, how can I put it, a lot of extreme factions of different flavors hanging around, and some people might want to dial down the porn, or they might want to model the marketing messages and dial down the marketing or dial up the marketing, or perhaps they want to filter out the left wing or the right wing content, whatever it might happen to be. And it's very similar in terms of instrumenting and understanding what the hell is out there, and if you get an invite from somebody, should you accept that invite or not? Then if it's trying to understand, have you lost a customer, or do you not want that customer in the first place? And for us, it's basically an existential threat to the network, because unless we empower users with the ability to tune out the bad stuff, for whatever their definition of bad is, then the network could easily collapse into anarchic, dark web style mass of people spinning up servers because they got kicked off Discord or Reddit, and imagine the mess that you can end up with. So long story short, it's something that we hope to work on in the near future to improve, especially if anybody wants to fund us to do it, just saying if any billionaires are in the audience. And it could also be useful for general customer management, that you could get much more of a quantified metric on, hey, this guy is part of that tribe, and I do actually want to talk to him a lot because he's part of my target demographic, and it's basically the same mechanism that you could use to also profile this guy to get kicked off the server because he's a Nazi, or whatever it might be.
That's a hard thing to follow up on.
Sorry.
No, so like I'll take a different take on this. So when we think about our product, which is a dashboard, right? And like most people consume it as a dashboard, and we've been thinking about it from the beginning because we started the product in 2014, and at that point as well, we already realized that maybe dashboard's not exactly what we want to build. Like we build the API, we'll let people pull the data and like you visualize it. But what other things can we build on top of it? And notifications and all those things came up, and we built those things in. But one of the things that we started to build now into the system, and we've been thinking about how could we have a conversation with the customer via the dashboard or via whatever like visualization technique you may use. And of course, like chatbots come to mind, right? And you can think about like they're already not just call stats, but there are other people who are much further down the road where there are people using Slack or Matrix to run bots where they talk to a bot to deploy stuff or to bring up stuff. Like I was just talking to someone from Turkcell yesterday, and what they have is a bot which runs on Slack, and it goes and pulls up the Grafana snapshot, like, and brings it into the chat, right? So like you can, like, instead of going to the website, which you could go and put a filter on, you talk to the bot and say like, hey, pull me the last 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and goes and does that query on Grafana, takes a snapshot of the screen and brings it back, and then you can annotate it and have a conversation. I think that's a really good way of thinking of going beyond just the user experience of like going to a website and checking, right? I can think of that in many ways. Like if I want to know if Amazon's up or not, I can go to Amazon's uptime website. But what if there was a cool way to get that information through other mechanisms? Like I could talk to a person. One way in my own company I can do is go to the website and see what the uptime for call stats is. I could go to the DevOps team and say like, what's burning? Like, is anything burning? And that's more conversational. They say like, they may tell me things that I may not be aware of by looking at a graph, right? Because the graphs only show whatever they're meant to show. They may not show something underlying that's not yet emergent or not yet focus of the company or of the team, but something that's brewing in the background, which may become an issue like 5 days from now, 2 months. And I think we need to start thinking about those aspects as well when we think about having a conversation.
that's a really important point, actually, and advocates of that conversational experience, some of the extreme folks sort of say, well, actually, conversational is how human beings want to consume information. So conversation is just going to eat the web. We're not going to be looking at pages full of information anymore. That's just dead now. We're going to just talk to our computers. How do people feel about that?
That's down to the individual. I know if my wife was sat here and she heard you say that, she'd run away screaming. But everyone has their certain limits to what they're willing to accept, and I do think the more that people are introduced into new ways in which information is given or taken from a given situation, that they become more comfortable with it as time goes on. So I think as a species, it will just become, an accepted reality that we already have the technology right now that a computer can read a person's expression and practically read their mind. Things that you're doing on an everyday basis gets logged, and the computer can pick out what food you're likely to prefer and what clothes you're likely to buy, and all these different things. So that the data's there that we already kind of know what people want, how people respond to certain criteria or stimulus. And it will reach a point, I think, that people will no longer really think about it because it will be so autonomous and so instant that there won't really be much of a chance for people to stop and think about it. It will just be there, if you know what I mean. I think it's, to some extent, it's like that already. But I also think that there will be a level of pushback. I think that people like to be natural. People like to converse and have conversation and not want to instantly think what the other person's thinking. The idea, there's this Black Mirror episode where people can see so many stats about someone they're talking to, and in some ways, when you're having a conversation with someone, it's nice not to know anything and to experience finding out and conversation and all of that, because it's natural within us. So you can get so far, I think, with technology before it bounces back again and everything then becomes more natural, because that's just we evolve far slower than technology does, and so in order for people to accept it truly, I think it's going to take a long time, and people evolving with that for it to be symbiotic and a perfect relationship.
I think that you need the tools available also to empower the user to decide whether they want to be profiled. It's something that's very topical for us at the moment, because historically a matrix IDs are a username on a domain name, like zip, like Jabber, like email. And in retrospect, this was a massive error, because it really is giving people a global user identity. And over the next couple of months, we're finally rolling out a massive change called MSC 1228, very exciting, matrix specs change 1228, which goes and replaces the DNS-based identifiers with public keys. But the interesting thing is that the public keys are per room. So every conversation you have a totally different identifier. Now, if you as a user want to correlate yourself by binding those through to an email address or a phone number and say, hello, I want to receive targeted whatever customer service, then you can, and it will be convenient. People will know how to contact you. They'll know that Matthew in this room is the same as Matthew in another conversation. But if you don't want to do that, having that sort of built into the fabric of the protocol to allow people the privacy, if they want it, to have a different persona, I think can be a really interesting way to slightly tilt the balance, such that if you want to go full Facebook and market people to death, you can, but also as a user, there isn't really a social impact if you choose to just spin up a throwaway ID for a conversation. And it's really good for GDPR, for better or worse, because if you want to GDPR erase yourself, you just throw away the bindings, you decorrelate yourself, and all you have are a whole bunch of unrelated public keys, rather than having your domain name and your username like baked into every conversation, which obviously from a PII perspective is a mess.
Neat.
Yeah, I think we're barely scratching the surface of what can be done with conversational intelligence. I think that there's a lot to be done. We're experimenting with voice fingerprinting in recordings, in conferences, being able to take meeting notes kind of on the fly just by using keywords to activate systems like you would with Alexa. But all of that's opt-in. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to say, no. keep me away from that. And then there's going to be people who see the value and just want to throw themselves into the deep end. So we just need to be able to offer options.
I think that raises. Sorry, I think that these raise good points as well, because you think about it. There's a lot of debate at the minute on social media about people saying things anonymously and not having any recompense for. There's no nothing comes back to them because they're anonymous. And should there be a law that enforces people to identify who they are before they can make a statement? And so you may have a law in the future that does that. But on the other hand, we've also got the GDPR law, which has come in and said, people should be allowed to remove any information about themselves from the internet because they're allowed privacy. So you then have the law contradicting each other in the most extreme ways because people want both. People want to be private themselves, but they want to make sure they know who it is that is imposing or give them information that they disagree with at the same time. And there needs to be a middle ground, but I'm not actually sure if there really is one, if you know what I mean. You have to satisfy both extremes successfully in a way that benefits everyone and everything, really.
Super. Big social issues, I guess, that cross over with who we are as people and what we expect, which is, quite a thing to address. Let's go back to brass tacks and talk about user experience. I suspect that if this were a room full of people that were average users of, say, video conferencing technology or whatever, and we said, how's your user experience? Probably the vast majority of sentences that come back would start with, meeting 5 minutes late, webcam, microphone, damn it, can't get it working. A big part of that, we're all mostly in the room software developers. A lot of our influence on that is the software and how smooth we make that user experience. Some of it is out of our hands and some of it's just pure physics, right? If you've got 3 webcams, turning the right one on is something the user is going to have to express some kind of an opinion about. But how much better can we fundamentally make that experience to have things just work in the way that our users expect? How much latitude have we got, and what should our vision be for that startup of a real-time communication experience for an average user? Anyone want to take that?
So we have we have 2 users that we deal with on a regular basis. One is our customer. We sell an SDK to developers, and so they are our primary user. They're using our API, they're using our SDKs, they're building out a solution with those tools, and we want to make the experience great for them. We want to make the development experience good and as seamless as we can make it. And then at the same time, they're then selling something to their users who we are kind of distanced from. We don't have the direct connection there. But ultimately, they're the ones who need to be satisfied. They're the ones who have to be happy, or they're not happy with who they bought from, and then they're not happy with us. So a lot of the control when open source projects too, when you're building a framework or something that someone else can use, is not in your hands. It's in the hands of the application developers who are using it to build something on top.
We have very much the same issue. We do work occasionally, or a lot really, for the end user. As an aside, we also provide a service which we never really have any connection with the end user. So we have very strong opinions over what it is the user wants, but the customers that actually pay for the services that we provide, that they're typically very abstracted from us in many ways. They pay for the service and they develop, but we don't really see what it is they're developing unless they come to us with a problem, and then we can help them with that. But we don't necessarily have a solid footing to actually be able to give more input beyond whatever problem it is they're facing at that time. So it's a difficult one because we can often look at some of the software of our customers, and it's already very much progressed to the point of being out there in the real world, and probably a bit late for us to be putting in our 5 cents.
So not a great deal we can do on some levels.
On some levels, definitely. Yeah.
I guess we're in a slightly opposite position for Riot, the Matrix client, in that we hook it up to POIC, or Massimo as it is now, for analytics for how people use the app on web, iOS and Android. It's obviously opt-in. As I said, we use call stats on the VoIP side of things. And frankly, particularly on POIC, there is a lot of data to deal with, and keeping the POIC instance up is a constant recurring joke. Every time traffic levels double, POIC promptly falls over and we have a couple of weeks gap in our stats. And it's more than a full-time job to do proper detailed analytics to understand what the user journey is. And I think often it's easy to underestimate that. You say, hey, as long as we've got the data, sure, somebody's going to go through it and work out the filter, at which point we lose the user here, 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 and here, and here. But actually keeping on top of that, doing a cohort analysis on it, trying to work out how many people we dropped off for this particular release, and trying to get correlation between all the different factions, yeah, that's a tough job. I mean, it's classic product management, I guess, but certainly, whilst building Riot, finding people who are both interested and motivated to do nothing but really dig into those numbers, in some ways is the Achilles heel. And at one point we thought, oh, if only we had decent WebRTC stats, it will be obvious to see what's going wrong. But it's more, oh God, we've got so many random complaints coming in from users. Clearly something's gone wrong in the turn server, or perhaps we shipped the wrong turn config. Come on, somebody's going to have to go into call stats to try to work out what's happened, and then finally, somebody sums up the courage, they go in for a couple of days to find out what's gone wrong. So it's great to have the data, but that's 2 days every 3 months that somebody's got the balls to go in and try to work out what's gone wrong. So in some ways, I think we have a plethora of data, but the discipline and the focus to do good stuff with it is tough.
So that segues to me. I'll answer both questions because there are two questions. I think one that you brought up and one that Matthew brings up is, so I'll go with Matthew's first. So one of the things that we've seen, and I think I have a talk later in the afternoon which talks about it, is that dashboards are dying, partly because we're overwhelmed with so much data, and when you have so much data, to figure out what is important is super difficult. Because what eventually happens is, most organizations, there are two people that you can listen to. You can listen to your boss, who will tell you what's important. You can listen to the customers, what is important. If your boss is not saying anything, you can go look up the dashboard to figure out what the customer is saying. Absent both, no one's looking at the dashboard, right? If there's no burning fire and your boss is not interested in everything looks okay, everything's okay, then there's no one looking at the dashboard. And over the last 5 years, one of the things that we noticed is exactly this phenomenon, that people would firstly enable call stats on their worst day, because a lot of people deploy stuff and then they did not figure out they needed WebRTC stats, and then one fine day their service blows up and they're like, hey, things are burning, how do I figure this out? And someone says Google, they say servers on fire, WebRTC, and then call stats IO comes up and they enable it, and that's the worst time for us to be onboarding a customer, because they're having a fire, they're integrating call stats, trying to figure out how to instrument this, and there's someone on the back of their head saying this needs to be solved yesterday, right? So there's that bit, and they enable it, they pay us money, they disappear after a while. They're still paying us, but we see the data coming in. So a good segue to the talk in the afternoon is actually flipping the question, because what we noticed over time is that people were not going to the dashboard as much unless there was an external trigger. So how do you build this external trigger, from a product development perspective, is how do you bring your people back in? There's something always happening, right? So we said, we have all this data coming in, now and we build this company to collect all this data, not only across, from one company, but across all companies, a SaaS product. So you can not only learn within this product, but we can learn across products and then apply it across the board, right? So if someone has an issue somewhere and we see the early warnings for someone else, we can say we've already learned something from the past, or in the recent past, which we can apply. So the the afternoon talks about how did we flip this equation into going after presenting people with hypotheses, so that you would go to the dashboard more often, because say here are things that are broken, right? And then you could Tinder, swipe left, swipe right, swipe up. Swipe left means I don't care, this is an interesting but not important issue. Swipe right, yeah, this is interesting but keep monitoring. Swipe up is oh, let's go look at this right now, right? And that's and that's independent of those two people, your customer and your boss, looking at something else which will give you an impetus to go look at the data, right? So that probably would solve some of the problems that you were looking into. And going back to the original question, the user experience of video communication, although I would say one of it's kind of solved problem. Like we know there are like 4 ways that you can do video. Like there's one person on stage, like one person on the bottom, somewhere there's a film strip, then there are equal size people, like 9, 5, 4, whatever, and then there are variants of these, right? You can mix and match these. So user experience wise, like kind of figured it out. Maybe not, maybe there's a third way to doing it, Magic Leap maybe one of those. But like if you want to be data driven, then going back to call stats is like a very good way, because one of the things that we did initially was like actually break down the whole journey of a user coming onto your website and actually leaving it, right? So like there's a page load right at the beginning of the thing, which has nothing to do with WebRTC, but we actually slurp all the data to figure out which JavaScripts are like holding up your page load. We've never exposed it, but we have all the data to know which JavaScript like loaded last and screwed up this whole thing that was waiting for the user to held up page load. Second thing, what happens when someone presses dial? Like how much time before like you see the video? So we have something called time to first media, like, and then you have something like how much time, like what was the devices that were available, which ones did they pick, how much time did they waste picking, how many times did they change it? So if you wanted to run this analysis, you could do it. I don't think anyone's actually done it except for ourselves. Like we publish WebRTC metrics reports mainly to like understand where people spend a lot of their time. I think a lot of people could benefit, but I guess, I don't know, does it change your revenue by much if people did not have that problem?
So this just triggered, if I can just jump in quickly, potentially an interesting idea. So I had a really good experience the other day with a system called Sentry. People know Sentry?
We use it.
It's really, really sexy. It basically grabs all of your logs and then does the kind of reach out by email style, hey, you should look at the dashboard kind of things that Varun was just talking about there. And I've been super impressed by this because the Matrix server implementations typically are very log chatty. If anybody's ever run one, you'll see like hundreds of thousands of lines of logs, and honestly, a lot of exceptions flying around, some of them important, some of them not so important. And yet, somehow this thing distills it down to like 5 emails a day, even though there are 25,000 log lines which are important. It looks at the kind of recurring themes, pulls out the log lines, give me an HTML email which I can click through and all the rest of it. Now, obviously, that's for code rather than humans, but I wonder if there is also a level of analytics beyond the VoIP stack and VoIP signaling layer and beyond the code layer, which could almost do a similar offering. Why doesn't Google Analytics get in touch to say, by the way, you've suddenly lost 30% of your users in the funnel kind of process which you defined at the outset? I don't think it does. And Massimo
it does, yeah.
You can get like emergency alerts saying...
Yeah, it doesn't alert. At the moment, it only goes to dashboard.
Wow, well that makes such a good idea.
It is,
I would
and
love
actually
my analytics to say, hang on a second, something's gone horribly wrong and you've got a spike in traffic from people on Hacker News and it's all dropping off after 10 seconds.
Right, so when we built our system and we looked at what other people were doing, and lo and behold, like a month after we had the field trials running for our stuff, we see this like Google thing on the right side. There's like a bot kind of thing which says like, hey, you are going to exceed your traffic from last month. And I was like, how did you figure that out? Click here for more. And I'm like, yeah, that's awesome, but who's going to this page?
Precisely.
Except me, like, who found out 2 months after like we launched our thing, like who else is doing stuff similar to us? And I think a lot of people have realized that they're pulling a lot of data, and they, especially Google Analytics, they should be like really at the core of it, because they've seen like 20, 30 years of data at this point, like at least 19, including Urchin's data. And they can see how the web's evolved, right? So they can say like, if we ran this web page 10 years ago, like how much time would it take? So you can see like, of course, Google's invested a lot on Quick, on HTTP 2, H3 now, mainly because they were so focused on improving user experience, and they had to go down to the plumbing to change it.
Well, if only they had the machine learning capabilities to kind of dig into the analytics data and tell you something useful with it. I mean, that would be really useful.
One day they may develop some of that stuff.
Yeah, possibly.
Okay, I'm really conscious. We're a few minutes over time. We started a little bit late by the time we got mic'd up and things. I just want to quickly whiz around the panel. Has anyone got a 10-second soundbite of anything on user experience that they don't feel they've had an opportunity to inject at this point, particularly at the far end of the panel?
Yeah, I'll start. For what we find is that every user wants something a little different. Our users being developers, everybody wants to customize things just a little differently. So I think it's really important when you're building out new projects that are being used by and sold to developers, that flexibility is key, that it can be manipulated and twisted and kind of turned into whatever makes sense.
Fantastic, thank you.
I would say that I don't think there's any tried and tested law. Obviously, there are foundational rules that people should generally follow to ensure that users have a good experience. But I think it's a lot like machine learning. There's generally sort of a sweet spot, but you can go too far either way. And it's common. Most people tend to go a bit far either way because it's a full-time job to ensure that you're running smooth down the center.
Fantastic, thank you.
I guess the takeaway from me, particularly on the open source side, is you shouldn't necessarily listen to what the users say, but you should look at what they do. It should be data-driven, and then having seen the data, you should dig in and try to understand why the people who didn't complain to you did the things that they did.
So I'll nuance it a little bit because I think a lot of people talk about data-driven, and it's actually good to have the data, but also be fact-driven because data can tell you a lot of things, but if you don't have the facts right, the data may mislead you into a wrong direction. So listen to your customers, look at the data, but also have like some facts about, or have some hypothesis on some of those facts.
Fantastic. I'd like to thank the panel for being such a fantastic panel and putting up with my inane questions, and then we can go off and have a lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.